I mean, the facts are very simple. The state of Texas grew by leaps and bounds, more so than any other state in the country. 89.1% of that growth was minority. So that's 2.73 million Latino, or 3.23 million minorities. That's pretty big. As a result, we gained 4 seats in Congress. The last time that happened in a state like Texas, it was in the 1860s after the Civil War and the years of Reconstruction. This may not happen in my lifetime again, may not happen in my children's lifetime. And this is very significant. And the fact of the matter is, legislative leaders made the decision to draw a congressional map that did not even reflect that growth. Now, 10 years ago, I was a freshman in the Texas House of Representatives. I barely knew where the bathrooms were at the Capitol. So let alone understanding how redistricting worked, I had no idea. Legislature didn't pass a map. The Legislative Redistricting Board drew a map, and next thing you know, my childhood friend that I've known since the 3rd grade, he and I were paired in a district in San Antonio. And if you've ever had to face your 3rd grade classmate and say, well, this is not about friends, this is about business, that's a hard decision. And I knew right then and there that our caucus was financially strapped. We did not have resources to fight a fight. And we actually had a split in our leadership in terms of the direction of the caucus itself. And by and large, we found that the districts that were most impacted by the Legislative Redistricting Board were Latino districts. And so I think I sort of made a pinky promise with myself back then that if I wasn't going to be around, the next time this happened, we were not going to be in that situation. And so in the fall of 2008, I was elected to be the chair of the caucus. Right away, for every dollar that we raised, I took 50 cents and put it in a special fund to make sure that we had money and resources for redistricting. When people were talking about redistricting, I was hiring lawyers. When people were hiring lawyers, I was filing lawsuits. And when people were filing lawsuits, we were filing appeals. And we had a very proactive, aggressive position that we were not going to let this cycle go by. And again, I fall back on this position that in the 1970s, we found ourselves fighting democratic institutions. That also existed in redistricting. And when it came to redistricting in the 1970s and the 1980s and 1990s, there were Democrats making decisions on the future of maps that often impacted the minority community. And organizations like MALDEF and LULAC were there to fight those fights. And they made it very clear, over the course of history, the only thing that's changed is the leadership. The issue is always the same, no matter who's in charge. It seems to me the minority community always got left out. And so for the first time, I will say, this redistricting was led by minority litigants, argued by minority lawyers, tried in a federal court in San Antonio before 2 Hispanic judges. That's never happened in redistricting history. And the result, I think, has never happened either, because you saw, at least in the state house map, you saw 6 legislative districts restored, which is much different than what the legislature passed. That is a big victory. 10 years ago, it was 3. We doubled that. Of course, there was always room for improvement. There were other things that we could have done in the House. I'd like to, if the opinion or the map maybe had a couple of different twists and turns, we could be looking at even bigger gains. But in the Congress now, we have an opportunity to elect a minority in Dallas. We have the opportunity to elect a minority in Central Texas from this part of Austin to San Antonio. We've been very clear that did not always require a dismantling of Lloyd Doggett. In fact, we advocated for him on many occasions. But the map is what it is now, and now it's an opportunity. And so you look at that, and that's a completely different picture than what existed on the floor of the House. And so, but it took that kind of advocacy and those types of partners to wage that war. And it's still ongoing, but as it stands, like you said, we have a map and we have a primary on May 29th, and we're going to have a very hot runoff in the middle of summer. And hopefully at some point we'll get to hear from presidential candidates talk about how elite we are to pursue a college education, and it'll be Texas will be back in the mix, and things will go back to normal, and hopefully we'll have a final map that still may or may not have some changes based on what happens with the dual track litigation in Washington, D.C. So suffice it to say, it's mostly over, but I think that there's still a few rounds of boxing left to go.
Yeah, okay, so talk a little bit about that. Today actually we had another development today,
We did.
So if you could just sort of talk about, the up-to-the-minute state of things.
Well, this morning there was a request by the district court in the District of Columbia, and as you know, voting rights litigation really involves 2 sections. Section 2, which means you have the sufficiency in population to create a minority opportunity district, and you failed to do so, therefore we're going to sue you to make it happen. Then you have Section 5 that says, we take a snapshot of the state of affairs, what we call the benchmark. What is the current state of affairs for legislatures? And then we look at proposals and we compare to see if we retrogressed at all. And that's Section 5 that takes place in D.C. So that court is still litigating. We had a trial up there, and we're waiting for their opinion. And in their, I guess while they're deliberating, they have asked the parties to brief, and they specifically asked the Latino Redistricting Task Force to substantiate the assertion that Anglo voters dominate the primary in Congressional District 25. And why I think that's significant is that the voting rights protection it's not protection for incumbents or political parties, it's protection for minorities. And one of the things you have to demonstrate that there's racially polarized voting. So you have Anglos that vote one way, and no matter the minority community, despite their best efforts, they never have the opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. And I think there's some disagreement as to whether or not polarized voting exists in Austin. Some people say Austin's Nirvana, where everybody comes together and there's no racial polarized voting and the best candidate wins. And some say that perhaps there are segments of racially polarized voting. And I think what the court is asked is articulate to me the argument that Anglos dominate the primary and there's nothing minorities can do in CD 25 to effectuate the outcome of an election. I don't see that as a positive sign for Congressman Doggett. I'm not his lawyer. I'm not part of his legal team. They may have a different view, but I do believe that is, asking them to justify perhaps an idea they have. And I think that the task force is not the only party that's going to brief it. I think anybody can brief it, but I believe the inquiry was specifically asked of them because they have advanced the position that there aren't issues concerning racially polarized voting in CD 25. And that by drawing this district into San Antonio and Central Texas, you can now truly have a minority opportunity for the minority community to have a say in the outcome of electing members to Congress.